Hello, hello. Okay, got it. Okay. Hello, hello. We are here in a conversation with Vera Hofmann from Berlin. Um, Hello, Vera.
Hi.
How are you? Where are you
I'm
now?
good. I'm in Berlin. I'm in my studio space.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Looks amazing there. I'm Dragos Olea from Apparatus 22, but also curator for Triumf Amiria. And we are having this conversation at the invitation of MATKA Association and Mihaela Cârjan, the curator of the program, How Should We Talk About Queer Culture? So the meeting is around trying to understand and also to learn from the practice of Vera. Um, they are artists, curators, activists, critical friends, working with many different mediums of art, from relational art to graphic design to curating to, let's say, I could include also curating as an artistic practice in your case, and working in many different contexts. And we're always about queer topics, or lots of times about queer topics, or let's say queering, from this queering perspective on a take on art and life maybe. And then first of all, how do you feel? How do you feel? How should we? Are you ready to roll?
Yes, I'm ready. I'm of course excited. Recording is always like you
Yeah,
have to be so sharp with this, but let's try. Let's try.
I'm
I'm ready.
also super excited to accompany the presentation, and we'd like to ask you maybe to introduce to our audience an earlier work of yours, sorry, the Contemporary Queer Compendium, which in fact is a very complex series that you developed over a few years while you were, let's say, let's quote you, on a quest for a cure to achieve a higher sensibility for social and political conditions, interpersonal and intrapersonal connections. Can you please, Vera, introduce this series? I know it's very complex, and hopefully we'll delve quite deep into the series and your methodology of working with this idea of curing and healing, and yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the space that I can have, and then we can both share, and all three of us share. And yeah, I hope there's something in it for the people. I will try to share my screen now, because then I can talk for a bit, like maybe 10 minutes or something, about the compendium, because it's yeah, quite entangled into a lot of thoughts and things. So I think I need to start with the story that how the whole thing started. So I had been researching healing and healthcare modalities for about like 7 years. Wait, is this running? No, it's not running. Why not? Yeah. Okay. So, and then I started to have the wish to combine the arts with healing in some ways. And I also wanted to do a master's in fine arts, as I only had like 3 years of training in photography before, but I was doing a lot of other work with other mediums. So I found the Cure Master, a one-time temporary master's course at the Sandberg Institute in Amsterdam, which I could enter in 2014. So I already arrived with the idea of making a compendium work with all the knowledge that I've gathered and with all the techniques that I've seen and tried out, and to find a structure and a methodology for all the bits and pieces I had gathered there. And the course was partly situated in locations such as a psychiatric institution, a hospice, a death museum, a botanic garden, a zoo, and so on. So we were highly encouraged to do work in the context of these institutions. And also each term had a theme that went with it, like pain, death, environment, nutrition, belief, and so on. So what sounded like a perfect fit for me and quite a radical program turned out to be also quite problematic, because this top-down approach in the context of such sensitive topics, with artists coming with a certain mindset, like also being very sensitive around the things, and then like going into all these institutions, like was prone to rupture and resistance, especially when it is backed up with a very neoliberal agenda of the Netherlands that got worse around that time and is still going into that direction. So there's quite some nice funding for the arts, which is great, actually easier than in Germany, for instance, to get funding. But we all, or I especially, became very suspicious of it, because the artists do services for the state by becoming social workers in a way that keep people at peace, and like the marginalized hopeful, the artist carelessly going.
They felt sort of instrumentalized in such processes, I say.
Yeah. And for me, like a lot of questions arose around like, what is my role? What is the role of the artist here? And what is our entanglement with the system that we came to critique also? And how can healing happen under these circumstances? So equally as I wanted to flee, the other part in me like gave it a go and thought, okay, the only way out is through. So I deeply engaged with the program, the themes, the institutions, and filling my compendium in the ways that I had not actually quite anticipated. So the result is sort of a journey that like where inner and outer meet, like my own journey with my surroundings merge, and like it's personal, it's situational, it's very site-specific and relational and political, of course. So so what you can see here, like I started with doing smaller works. Like the master's course started out in the psychiatric institution for 3 months. So some of us even lived there and had quite a difficult time actually with that. And I thought a lot about what could be a decent way to maneuver with the residents there, like with the patients, the residents that live there and that like are there to heal, or, you know, like, and also without speaking a word of Dutch, like not knowing about the history and how to approach them safely, like for me and for them. So there was no introduction really. So I went around, gathered info, sensed the vibe, read about the anti-psychiatry movement and so on. And so I started this Tumblr, which you can see now, which went then on for like 2 years, just to get my thoughts down and to have like a stream of consciousness like thing, like photography and all this stuff that was in me, like, ugh, this cure thing sucks, and like how, like the absurdity of health under capitalism, basically. And but then I started to hang out in the cafe. Let's see if I can switch this thing now. Yeah. So yeah, I hung out in the cafe talking about music with people. So that's why I thought, okay, we can share about like we can share about music. And I don't speak the language, maybe they don't speak my let's see, but we can speak the language of music. So, and then, yeah, we hung out, they talked, like they told me like things they care about, and then we made playlists, and then, you know, I just put them up online and we made them together. And so it was some nice interactions. They could share then the link with people they wanted to, you know, and like send them home or whatever. But it was also like, what the fuck am I doing here? Is that art, or like, was I making art? And so, and also, is that socially engaged art, or is this the win-win situation that the institution wanted us to make us believe? Or, you know, is it just exploitation and feeding from the exotification and the suffering of people? And so all of this was not really like debatable really well, and we also lacked
in the structure.
in the structure of this matter. Sure, yeah, we talked about it, but it was a bit difficult because the teachers or the professors had their own mind, let's say. And yeah, so, and then I started to like just, you know, just do stuff and just care about like, where am I and what's the absurdity of that, and how, yeah, so I started to make whatever t-shirts and like, clothes and stuff. And so over the time I had a lot of like these smaller outputs, like, so I invented like rituals and machines for heartbreak. I gave lectures on nutrition. I did an e-health online pilgrimage. Let's see if I, like, my mouse is a bit weird. So yeah, I did like months of doing nothing and tracked like what does nothing mean. I did a calendar about the heartbreak stuff. This is an online pilgrimage to the river, to the source of the river Cure. It's a fun online, and, you know, like trying to kind of find my way through, but also, yeah, doing my own like healing on the side. This is the hack with like a machine that I built, like, yeah, very specific, very embedded work. And so when I thought like, okay, am I doing art therapy to myself, or what is this weird thing? And it was trying to cope actually. So the contemporary cure compendium maybe should have like have the name contemporary coping compendium or something. And also we found out that the term cure is of course like a bit weird because it should actually be care. But we never really talked about care a lot. So yeah, anyway, then coming to a bit of like middle-sized or bigger works. So I had some jobs in Greece for that time, like exhibitions and works, and over the time of like the financial crisis from 2012 to 2015, I was there from time to time. I had friends. I went to talks and demonstrations against the ongoing like crisis and austerity measures and the political decisions that were up. And 2015, I realized like the mood is really depressed and really different from 2013. People were getting really exhausted and hopeless after 6 years of crisis. And I went for a residency on my way like to the island. I contemplated of what the fuck can we do, like, and what is there a last resort like in that hopelessness? And then I remembered like people are meditating for world peace, and I found it so ridiculous because it's mostly like, not mostly, but sometimes really people who are spiritually bypassing stuff instead of like activism. But I said, okay, well, let's give it a try. So I started meditating for the enemy, like Germany's hardliner finance minister Wolfgang Schäuble, like a key player in the EU enforcing the austerity measures, right? So I started to lead like small groups of people, and I gave like sending metta, like love and kindness to the fierce minister. And of course, as cynical as you can find this work, because also I'm the German, and it's a difficult relationship with Greece, right? So like I started to try it out, and people really started to like it. Like finding a little bit of ease of mind and a short moment of a different perspective on their agency. So yeah, I tried it in like different
locations. It's not cynical at all. It's quite empowering. On contrary.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, yeah, there were different opinions about it, of course, right? And then one day, so then I went to like put it up on Syntagma Square, like the main square where the demonstrations are. And we sat down to meditate. I wrote down like what I wanted to say, and then hung up this thing. And there were people coming. Of course, they didn't want to be on the camera. So there's a group on the side. But then also, yeah, like it was a moment of bonding also about it. So, you know, you can see like, I couldn't forgive him. I was very unsuccessful. And then the other one, like I had mixed feelings, and I thought about the whole situation. But actually, you know, I had a peace of mind for a moment, and it was actually more peaceful than in my home, for example. So that was kind of like a healing method that we tried, and maybe it can work for a little bit, you know, but of course, not to stop the activism for sure.
The entire project looks like, you know, like you're trying an array of methodologies for healing.
Yes, totally. Yeah, exactly. And then like there was the next project also looks a bit like meditation stuff. It was called Cryptochromatic Jet Lag. So I invited one artist each, like 5 in total, for a full night at the Botanic Garden. Also, we got introduced to that Botanic Garden where I thought like, okay, yeah, let's then work with it. So, and then we did experiments and works around how to grapple with this strange, like colonial plants and pots preservation, leisure, institution, weird thing a Botanic Garden is. Like one artist even said like, I feel like I'm in a supermarket. So, and of course it has a relevance for the city, this Botanic Garden, right? Like for city planning and leisure, and next to a hospital. And but then it was like it should go down, like they wanted to like tear it down because of a parking lot and like all of that stuff. So we tried, like we went and investigated sensitively, I would say, like with what our angle each time was. So we built a musical instrument, we made performances with the pieces and bits that were there, and And with one like artist, I stole the cacti collection, like the nearly extinct cacti collection, and we gave them a tour through the city because, you know, before they like die out in the botanic garden, they can just have some fun. And we went to
the last weeks of touring the city.
Yeah, and went to the bar, and then people interacted with the plant. One plant was called Disco Cactus. That was, you know, whatever. Like had some fun also. And one work which I want to show here is called The Shepherdess. So I went with the artist Ruchama Norda, which you can see lying down here. And she had a special relationship to a plant, Salvia divinorum, that also grew in the botanic garden, and which is a psychoactive plant. And so we recorded, like for the full night, we recorded a healing journey where she took that plant and tripped on that plant. So we prepared the space, like had the plants there with all their companion plants, and like, you know, gave them some offerings and stuff. The offering mainly was eaten by ants and cockroaches. And then, yeah, here now she's already like tripping. So she ate the leaves, or she had them under her tongue. Like we had like old like books where we draw that information from. We had that with us, like a small library. And yeah, like we meditated before, and we prepared ourselves, and really like did the whole thing. And then yeah, this is a cockroach eating the banana. Yeah, and then like her trip started, and then we, in the end, in the editing, we enhanced that with like Second Life avatars that we built of ourselves. Like this is me, you know, this is her, to like, you know, like to make that visible, what's going on inside of her mind when she was tripping. So and like had this Facebook chats that we had before and after also accompanying the video. So yeah, like how she felt, what it is, like what she went through. That was quite an intense thing. Yeah. Then another thing, yeah, was I got invited with Ruchama actually to do a that's the website where you can see my stuff, contemporarycurecompendium.com. So we got invited to an art institution in crisis and should like have an event there. And I was like, okay, like that's an institution in crisis. Like we should do something else there, just like not eventing again. So I gathered the people in the circle that you can see here, also did a little ritual thing, and to make like prepare the ground for like having a community kind of atmosphere. And then I gave them their entry feedback, which was basically my artist fee, because I believe like no one should profit from a crisis, right? Like we're all in crisis, and there were always like people who profit massively from that. And I didn't want to be part of that. I just wanted to like be with the people and see what we can do actually. And then I handed them over like the master key of the institution for them to just feel free to do whatever they wanted. And yeah, like, and leave just host the situation and just leave it up to them to explore and really go into the office. So people did that, and they used the copy machine. They switched off the Wi-Fi. One did like long distance phone calls because she couldn't afford them otherwise. And in the end, we watched films together, and people bought ice cream from you know what, like from the money that they now had. Yeah, like, so we appropriated that space, and we're really thinking about like what this institution also is. Like normally we go there in awe, and like, you know, it belongs to someone, and like, yeah, it was a moment of communifying, I think. Like, yeah,
and also using the infrastructure of this place that is not necessarily there for you, like exactly. For you, but for these people that necessarily that you invited, or they joined you. And it's nice to look at, you know, what's behind, but also to think maybe in an institution like this, in crisis, to think also about the, you know, the both infrastructure, but also the material aspects of an institution, and you know, maybe to think about also working with on healing about also the invisible immaterial aspects.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and then like for the graduation pieces, so I had this story that I carried with me, like from the loss of my mother, and that onset of like illness and what is it, how does healing work, and so on. So I wrote this this text that was like, yeah, like a journey through my 7 years of findings and also working my way through it. And the text combines like autobiographical recollection, academic essay, satirical analysis, and yeah, it's like a story like that ends, yeah, on a hopeful note. Starting very angry with a very angry female or whatever, like women's queer voice, and then in the end I was like, okay, yeah, but I ended up in quantum physics basically. But okay. And then for the graduation piece, like the installation, yeah, I really went for it. Let's see if I can start and put off the sound, maybe then I can talk a bit about it. It works. Whoop. Oh. Is it going? Hello?
Yes, it's moving.
Oh, okay, cool. It's called All I Want to Do Is Sit in the Sun for a While. So within 3 months, the work grew from a short ephemeral sensation, like a memory of a specific vision I received during orgasm, actually, into a walkable, immersive installation in like a 100 square dome space with a steep platform and a quadraphonic sound installation. So it became this blue, poetic, angry, tired meditation of sorts about like intimacy, queer women's sexuality, or like sexuality of people with vulvas, memory, belonging, conditions of female women's, queer women's labor and artistic labor also. And the conceptual idea was to highlight the cost of artistic production in a very personal way. Of course, not like, yes, there's also links to the economic side of it, but also what it means for our souls and hearts by sharing our memories always and putting those into form. And by putting them into form, they are overwritten, like the original one is overwritten and altered. So it's lost forever in a way. And what happened also with this one for me. Like the original information is like, yeah, is overwritten with what I've done here, what I've thought about it, like
how you transformed it into,
yes, exactly. Yes, and it's like and that's like we're facing these personal losses when we're giving ourselves in our artworks also. But we still do it because that's what we do, like we give ourselves, right? And so yeah, and maybe Anna can switch on the sound a bit to.
Where was this?
That was that was in the Bürgerweeshuis. That was the exhibition space that we had, and I just fought for this space because I thought that's where I wanted to have that work. Even though I just had this idea and this memory, and I was like, fuck, now I have to build this room. But I don't know, it worked out in a way. Yeah, so there's sound, and I made the sound, and then a friend of mine helped me with like, making it nicer.
Hello. How are you? Hello from the other side. Hello from how are you? Hello from the other side. Hello from the other side. Hello from how are you?
Yeah, and it was just beautiful to see, like at the end of this journey of 2 years of struggle, the people
we touched upon a lot of sensible issues, but we never talked about sex.
Really enjoyed the space so much, and kids came, and like all generations came and engaged with this thing.
I negate, therefore I am, 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 therefore I am slightly moving, I am slightly moving, I am slightly moving, I am slightly moving, I am 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 moving, I am
So yeah, and then the sound came from all sides. So it was really like a
immersive.
immersive thing, and the room was blue and the light came in different ways, and then there was rain and clouds and stuff, and so it was really, it did the work, and it was very like specific for that space.
But I'm very curious also how did you negotiate it with the school, with the master program, and also with the institutions that you are going, your ideas? How much freedom was there, or how much you had to sort of fight for them?
Well, the last one was a bit of a fight for that space, but in the end, I mean, I was very engaged in the program. I did work around every topic basically, so they were happy. It was more like I wanted to do something different, maybe. I had something else in mind, and I feel like I'm so busy with like engaging and grappling with the program, I don't come to my own ideas. And the last one actually was the one that I really wanted to work on. So the last one, like I really like said, okay, fuck it now. I really need to skip like all the stuff, and I needed to write this thing, like the text I wrote in a month, like every night, and then so that was okay. And then one person just came up to me from, and I was like, oh, you're definitely making the biggest gesture. Okay.
It was the time, you are just preparing for this. Hold on.
Yeah.
It's like a passage through this.
Yeah. So yeah. I don't know, like it was a lot about it, like empowering and finding agents in the situation where you just you're put in, right? It's like to like a training for accessibility, co-creation, finding joy and connection, and also like work with the resistance in a productive way, and just making some trouble also. Like I made trouble all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to, right?
Yeah, we need to. I think it's always we have to sort of look into these tensions that could bring some change around around with the practices, and to learn from this. And I'm curious, talking about this one, about because you are reflecting about what are you doing? Was it art? Was it not art? Was it useful for anybody or useless? Or one of the works in the contemporary cure compendium was centered around this cryptic useless art is disease. And I was curious, maybe you can tell us something about it. I don't know, could be a disease that most of us might suffer from. And can be, as you said, can be heartbreaking, can be soul breaking, can be breaking many things in sensible beings. So I'm curious about what do you think about usefulness or uselessness of an artist? And if in this process of thinking about the useless artist disease, if you had some healing technologies that worked on you, on your friends, or maybe there's nothing that could work with this useless disease, let's say, this feeling of being useless sometimes.
Yeah. Also, like the useless artist disease work, like is a container for also a journey of finding all of that, like grappling with this political and socially engaged art, of course, and like which is mostly not very sensitive to the communities, and so it's either like using communities in a way, or swallowed up and applauded by a system. So it's very difficult, I find. And so if it's so useful for the system, then of course it's useless in a way also. But also coming from this highly competitive Berlin, I felt like there's nothing to do anymore for artists. We cannot make an impact. I should become a permaculture farmer, which is, or like a trauma therapist or whatever, which something that we really need right now. And so the whole market became quite shallow, and every exhibition became like only social gathering, building social capital and so on. So I'm still grappling with this, but like inventing the thing. I can show again like some small images of that. Like I started inventing the useless artist disease is like a method to hack into the healthcare system. Let's see, is it going? Yeah. So what, like the thing is, like, when pharma industry can invent diseases for their benefit to profit from those diseases, artists can invent diseases for their profits, for their like healing, right? So
for their own well-being.
For their own well-being, exactly. So self-labeling becomes also, again, like a coping strategy for life, under the potential doom of stigma and self-stigma, of course. But also it calls for attention. It becomes like a brand, and then to invent a label means creating a market. Also, I studied business and marketing at one time in my life, so and
myself
with that,
too. Myself too.
Yeah. Weird times now. But creating a market or creating some buzz around it that you can have like a space for research, and also like maybe funding or experimentation, and maybe potential cures. So I wrote this paper, and then I first set up the AUA. That's AUA is ouch in German. Let's call it the Anonymous Useless Artist Disease Support Group, which is this thing. And then I mean, like, we met regularly over the course of several months, all the useless artists, and we made very useless work. And we exchanged feelings and thoughts and texts, and what can we do? And maybe we cannot do anything, we're doomed anyway. And yeah, and then I asked Naomi Klein what I can do, or Rancière about their take. Yeah, about the take. I mean, of course, it was a silly thing when I just caught them somewhere. But then I set up situations for receiving help from people from various professions and art audiences asking for treatments. And one recommendation stuck with me still from a colleague of mine: invent your own universe and invite people into it. Like, just do your thing. That was another person, but like, yeah, but like the own universe, like, what does it mean? Like, it's so individualistic, and that's exactly part of the problem, right? I mean, it's great if artists invent their own universes and then people are attracted to it, but for me still it was like, I want to like be with people, co-create, and be in connection with people. So I'm still grappling with this one. I think we're trapped. So I haven't really continued my artistic practice in this way so far, but I think if I would continue now, I would totally be more like from the queer community that I embedded much more in, that I find usefulness again, like, and we do, like, like, because that now has, like, I could focus my purpose a bit better in the queer community. And before, like, the queer community or the lesbian community or the communities I was in before, they were like a little bit unpolitical, like apolitical, and now it also, through like exchange and such an international city, like, so many things come up now that have been around and suppressed in German neoliberal boringness, like. So now it's like, we do need counter imaginaries and utopian thinking desperately, and we cannot leave the field to what it is. And so, yeah, let's see, I can stop this thing. So,
but
healing
talking about community, maybe we go to another let's say very important group of works, or let's say, or the series that you did in Berlin in the Schulz Museum. It was this combo of long-term projects that I find equally charged and fierce. In the Year of the Women that you co-curated, and 12 months that you curated. And I was curious, maybe you can introduce the audience these two projects and your role, and also how they came about, and what kind of support was there in the institution for these projects, and what was your role in the institution, because I know that you are involved in a different way in the institution, and then you entered also with these curatorial projects, let's say the program.
Sure. I still got that hook with, like, you wanted to know about the healing techniques, but we can skip that.
Yes, we want to.
It's like, wait, maybe I have some.
Anything to share, anything that worked for you, or was a hint that it could work for you, or for your friends, please do share, because I'm sure we can learn a lot, and we have to start talking about communities, We have to.
I mean, it is connected to the communities, right? So I think the individual things, yes, they're important, but the community is the thing, and we need to find the communities to heal and to like be ourselves, and this is a bit what I found, like connect to the body, to the environment, to the surrounding. And yes, you can have many techniques, but we need to care about, I don't know, nutritious food, clean water, peace, shelter, you know, all these things that also make up the whole environment, like because we are all connected, and that is like activism also is a healing tool, definitely. But sure, like I don't know, work less, connect to nature, know your body, know other bodies, know about consent, keep boundaries, and like know about your digestive system and your nervous system, and like all these things. I think that it's very necessary to know how we also are in conflict together. You know, like what happens when we have conflict, like why are things escalating, and why do we feel depressed? Part of that is the digestive system, other part is the nervous system. And for marginalized folks, like to find channels for the anger and the rage, and it's super important. And like, I don't know, like engage in sexual practices, you know. So all like, I think it's a holistic view, and it's just not like, oh, I need to, I don't know, swallow that pill and that pill, which is clear. But I think we can, like, our bodies can so much thrive in, of course, safer spaces. That's what we were working on in the queer community, right? As difficult as it is, but a lot of people find healing, but also like hate. So it is like we need to really figure out how that works, which is connected to the next work that we're going to talk about. So because as positive as the project was, as hateful and destructive it was at the same time for some. So how do we figure that out as a community? And that needs constant care also for the people who have a role at this point, and how can we support them? How can straight people support queer people? How can cis people support trans people? You know, just like do the work and help the people, and like help each other out, because like I have a new mantra right now, like from the artist Billy B. Joker, like you have no chance, grab it, which is really nice. So
it is a bit like that, you know. You just have to invent your chances because there are not so many around, you know.
Yeah.
And then, but what about, since you reflect so much about all these topics, and you have also all these experiences that, you know, they turn into work, they turn into sort of methodologies or incipient, let's say, I don't want to say tools, but, you know, maybe ways of approaching things. What about imagining a mini institution that could help other institutions, you know, to understand better what they could do in change, you know, the way they engage with artists, the way they care about artists.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think that's go for it.
We should.
I mean, after like we can talk more a bit about the Schules Museum, but during that time also we thought like, okay, what could be like really helpful for the community actually to have exactly that, like to have a place where we just support the artists, just do the support work, don't do anything else. Like the artists and the groups, they know better than we do as the institution. Just give them the tools, the economic means, and the knowledge to do that. And I think, I mean, there are like things that pop up. There's the Center for Intersectional Justice, who does great work. And there's like a healing collective called Casa Qua in Berlin, you know, like BIPOC trans healing collective. But as you say, like maybe we need to have, for exactly those questions, why are we so hurtful to each other? Why is this fucking institution things not working have a data institution, like a sociocratic thing where, you know, all the hubs are better connected to each other. Because at the moment we're like individually or group wise doing great things, but we don't really exchange, and then the knowledge is lost. And you know, it's like it's the same thing with queer community. Like the older generations always say like, why are you not listening to us? Why is they not learning from us? We always start new and new.
Like reinventing the wheel again and again. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a bit
I
silly.
know. There's so much knowledge that we should tap into to to learn to
Yeah.
sort of. Yeah, we think a lot. We also in our practice with apparatus, we thought a lot about because some of the work that we are doing it's about future, but then there's so much knowledge in the past that is some sort of got lost in the folds of memory that we should look into and learn from, and then we can make a leap into the future, maybe.
But also, like, I try to like gather the learnings from that year from the Schules Museum, and it's just so hard how to archive affect also, like how to archive everything that happened, because it's so complex and so many people, and you cannot only have that run through like one brain or two, three brains because it's so huge, but we don't have the capacity. Also, we're running out of steam, because that's what also the funding bodies are made of. There's like maybe a little small publication, but then we need to run to the next project to get like get our food on the plate, right? And that's not sustainable.
I know. Sometimes these practices, you don't have this kind of support, long-term support for in-depth slow research, or not necessarily slow, but something that is coagulating very much more slowly than we have these few months of doing something between different calls on different short-term projects.
But I think it is coming, because the knowledge is getting more, and people are like, the pressure from the marginalized communities thankfully is coming to have more rest, like to figure out, oh, actually that's why, like, or people knowing about like, oh, we live in capitalism. I mean, 10 years ago, total ignorance, and now it's much more leftist or abolitionist, or I don't know, like, information, how to make it different. And so let's see, I'm a bit hopeful still.
We are also very hopeful, and just listening to you again, it's energizing and giving us more hope. So let's go to maybe to the two projects from Schules Museum that you initiated and curated and co-curated, to maybe introduce us a bit the projects, and to see what are your conclusions sometime after.
Let's see. So again, I need to start with a bit of a story, because otherwise it doesn't make sense to
introduce the context. And
so I got invited and elected in 2016 to join the board. The board of Schules Museum, the board of directors of Schules Museum in Berlin, which is the largest museum for gay, male, now queer arts and culture in the world. So so that is a volunteer position, being on the board, but it still has the power to make like executive decisions on a strategic and also on a daily basis. And it's just not like, ooh, we have an idea and maybe you can think about it, but it's more like it's work, like it's managerial like work. So you quickly know the ins and outs in detail about how that museum functions. The museum was founded in 1985 by a group of gay male activists and is still self-organized. Since 2013, it's mainly funded by the state. And even though the museum's members already in 2008 decided to reorient from a gay cis men's museum to a queer museum, open for all, presenting all aspects of the LGBTIQ community, I didn't see much of that change when I arrived in 2016. The staff and the volunteers were 90% cis gay white men. And the exhibitions were also like according to that. I have some slides that I can show you. So Ausstellungen means exhibitions. So 94, the blue one is the gay exhibitions, queer, trans, like lesbian. So you can see, and that's I think 2% BIPOC that we don't have in this chart, like 2% BIPOC exhibitions. And that's kind of the same with the whole Berlin LGBTIQ institutions. You know, you can see it looks the same. So gay men still have most of the funding, which also means most of
visibility,
visibility and also opportunities to narrate their stories in the way they think the story should be narrated of queer culture and queer history. So also then in the museum, the selection committee was quite homogenic. So, and what it brings is like vitamin B, and diversity is not so huge. And then I found like deep rifts between the hierarchies, like the volunteers who run the bar and the museum day to day. And then there's like another hierarchy that is the staff of the museum, like administration and so on. And then there was the board, and they all didn't really work well together, and everyone hated the board, and and so difficult. But also rifts between the genders. Lesbians, like, ooh, the lesbians, or ooh, the women, ooh. And then the generations, like the older generation was still there, curating since the last 30 years, like some of them. And also it looked like in the 80s or something, it wasn't very juicy and exciting for younger people. And a lot of people didn't even know the museum, even though it's such a huge institution. And especially those of color, they were like, ugh, it's a racist place, we can't go there. And so I was pretty shocked when I found all of this, and it's like, oh, okay. First we need to like do something about that, and like to make it more attractive. I didn't also want to work in a place that I found like, like, okay, like if I engage, I want to make it more sexy actually. And we all wanted, so there were a younger generation that was trying to make it, like we were all on the same, not all, no, that's not true, but some of us were on the same plate. And then we tried to do it. So I can show you another thing. So that's how, like the CI of the museum, like the visual identity looked like, and everything was a bit dry and, a bit like 90s style. And then, so yeah, we wanted to make a new design. So I led this thing because yes, I did work in advertisement and so on. So I know that. And now it looks like this, much more fresh and queer, and using like more colors and having like, like, hey, we are here. And also having this Schwules Museum, which means gay male, a bit out of the thing. Okay, anyway, then I led the exhibition group, which is the committee where the planning happens, and try to make it more contemporary, try to make it more like, have a curatorial approach that's actually a curatorial approach, and not just like, oh, I know someone who could, I mean, that's a bit
like a curatorial vision, let's say.
Yeah, to have like, and then we try to figure out like, is there a one-year theme that we can all agree on, and so on. And then as I was facing so much resentment and sexism, the moment I actually arrived in that museum, because of my gender, my profession, I was like, the artist, the whatever, woman, lesbian, whatever they wanted to call me. They didn't even like really ask. So yeah, there was a lot of like, that doesn't feel right. And also my colleague, Birgit Busold, who actually introduced me to the museum, she had been on the board for 15 years, and she found support in me and the feminist cause, and I found support in her navigating the whole thing. So there was a lot of bonding happening, and comforting each other. And then at one point we just snapped. I think we were in a theater play. It was supposed to be queer, and it was gay men as always. And it's like, fuck. And then there was one lesbian who was also depicted in a very negative way. And I was like, okay, we're done with this. We need to change something. Let's have a full year of lesbian women's perspectives, non-binary perspectives, trans women's perspectives, and we need to like do something. And we have to have a full year that we see how much strength also this community has. And it's just not, like a side topic, but it's actually whole communities in Berlin, like the whole sex community, like sex positive community is so huge, like queer feminist community there, like BDSM community, etc. It's like huge filmmaking, like it's full on. And also in the 80s and the 90s, so much like culture from queer women and lesbian women that we needed to dig that up. So that's what we did, and we called it Year of the Woman, and the title referring in a tongue-in-cheek way to the 75 United Nations International Year of the Woman, which was important, but as we can see, it didn't change much. So we put it out there, and immediately people were like, wow, like it was just this word was so confronting in the museum. So the gay men were like, okay, the lesbians are taking over. The lesbian women were, why don't you call it the Year of the Lesbian? So there was a lot of like turmoil from the beginning. And I was also like, okay, there's something, we're onto a path here, you know, like, okay. So, and in the end, we pushed it through. We hosted like 9 exhibitions, over 100 events in that year. And they were curated by collectors, individuals from the queer, trans, lesbian, BIPOC communities, mostly out of Berlin because the funding was like mini, which is also like normally there's exhibitions in a museum that have one exhibition has that funding, which we did, like we had for the whole year. But that's another topic to talk about, the economic sides. I can show you, like we really tried to like have it on all levels, right? To have like change, and like I use this change management, that diversity, which is weird names, but it's just buzzwords to know what we're aiming for, like trying to find other people who want to have something to do with the museum. We had a bar, we had like a diversified shop, we had new works in the archive, and then we had these arts and culture exhibitions for rooms packed the whole year with things, and then we had our own feminisms, like that was a lecture series to bring everyone on board, you know, like to have the latest theory and activism, and also the history, like 100 years of voting right for women and so on. And then the 12 moons, which I can show you later. So just some pictures. That was the opening ceremony, 3 women doing rituals and stuff for the opening of the moons, which was the most controversial event ever. Because like I'm the lesbian who smoked the gays out of the museum.
Okay, so you have a reputation there.
Yeah, that became like a hard thing. That's an opening for Lesbian Visions, like art from like 3, 4, 5 generations of lesbian and queer artists. This is like, yeah, an event from the moons. This is how it looked like, one of the exhibitions. That's an exhibition from Coven, Berlin, like a queer feminist collective. That's the Lesbian Action Center from the 70s and 80s and 90s. Yeah, and here we have the moons. Yeah, this
the
is
lounge for the video.
Yeah, that's the lounge for the moons. Yeah, here that's how it looked like in action. People watching films together, hanging out. Here's one from the bar. That's one table from the bar, and yeah, maybe, yeah, this is people watching. So like for the moons, like I took the smallest space in the museum and even like cut it in half, and I wanted to work with an easily accessible medium, and it served a very specific purpose, like providing an ever-present feminist voice for every minute of the museum's opening hours, because I thought maybe the project collapses totally, and maybe there's, who knows what's going to happen, maybe there's a political shift on the board or something, but so let's see. Yeah. So, and then, yeah, you can see how it's set up. Also, everything was like tiny budgets, but we loved it. Like, we loved the space. So we had
That's amazing,
like 88 films, international films, queer feminist films, video works by artists, organized in 12 themes, changing every new moon, because I also wanted to, like, you know, like work with the date a little bit, like, mix it up a bit. And then, like, it was focusing on the gaps and inclusions, gaps and exclusions of the year, because I knew, from what we have programmed, I knew, there will be a lot of things
that are not in the exhibitions.
Yeah, things are lacking, and also especially the representation of BIPOC and trans positions. So I tried to co-curate as much as I could, So one time the Transformations Trans Film Festival in Berlin came with their QT BIPOC team, and then they organized like ACS International Minority Film Festival from Pakistan. They organized a film series and an exhibition on the side, and so on. So and it was like the program was a lot about like political current topics that are really important for the community. It was about like making community, also looking into the past, resistance, but also like economic aspects and ecological aspects. Like Annie Sprinkle was there, had a film, actually a premiere was their film Water Makes Us Wet. Like we had like sex was a topic, of course, and like trans positions. It wasn't like full journey. So that's it, maybe how we did that. And we try to curate really. We try to open it up in the beginning to everyone involved in the museum, but then we also needed to close it again because the ideas weren't very feminist that came from the people, because it was not a feminist museum. There was not a lot about and it was even like some people were, I would say, sabotaging the project internally. So it was a full array of feelings. So it was the most successful year in the museum of 30 years. I mean, there was a big exhibition in 2015 with the German Historical Museum. Besides that, just out of our own capacities, it was very, very successful, but equally the backlash was amazingly hard.
Within the museum structure or also beyond?
Both. Like in the museum, like people really tried to help, try to do, but also the structures weren't made for contemporary artistic production, and it was it was not like on the way to getting really professional, but not there. So we had to do a lot of stuff, everything on our own, basically, like a lot.
I was very familiar with some of the things we have to do in a very small team, and you know.
But like the worst thing actually was the hate from outside. So the community, like the older gay community, was really in shock.
Wow.
Well, in shock.
Out of sync with realities, or
like facing the reality that there's other people who want to have a spot in the museum, and everything else before, you know, like we have a lesbian exhibition, we have a trans exhibition, but it wasn't feminist. It was, you know, it was very much a certain agenda that couldn't host and hold space for everyone else who makes up the queer community. So to realize that gap from, oh yes, we want to, and use some token people in exhibitions, to actually, oh, that's what it means.
yeah,
then
that was
also,
a big shift.
We lost some people along the way inside the museum. Other people we gained, but the hate from outside went on social media. They were writing articles. They were like gathering and then going to the board and wanted to take over the board when the elections were, and then accusing us of being like militant, like the whole, like the usual, the angry lesbian. In the end, I was even like heterosexual, like the whole. Yeah, so first I was the lesbian, then I was the queer one, then I was the militant queer feminist, then I was the esoteric, then I was the curator who has no clue about what they do and they should get a proper job. Then I was ruining the museum, so I got like individual mails, and then I got like, then some lesbians told me like, there's the news, you're not even queer, you're not even lesbian, like you are heterosexual, and I know who people launched this, like who are the people who launched this thing. It's a bit funny, but also it was very sad and very hard.
It's frustrating having in mind, the efforts you've been doing to make possible such a program that looks so intricate and so complex and so, and also underfunded for sure.
Of course, and then also and what was really hard was that the lesbians also, because we made so much space for lesbians, and then they came up and then, okay, I don't know, it's the TERF debate, and then we were trans inclusive, which we shouldn't be, and that was heartbreaking, just heartbreaking to see the community so divided. And all the shit that was put under the rug just emerged in that year, and also other projects in that year had similar experiences. So it was a certain time also where the whole thing erupted, and that would be another talk why that is, and what. But it also took some time to figure out the background of that thing, why is that now, and who are the players, and why are they all connected, and it has something to do with the anti-Deutsche, and it's a bit it's a difficult thing. But yeah.
But I can understand also, I can attest also a sort of extremely fragmented scene here too in Romania. There are people that just can't be in the same space, exhibition space, let's say, or with others, even if they're part of the same community or the minority. Or it's just incredible. As you said, it's heartbreaking because you try to make an effort to give visibility and voice and, let's say, opportunities to people, and then you have to make peace between groups and to be somewhere in between, and people just you can never make everybody happy for sure, although you try. And then you fail. You can also feel like you fail miserable at this, trying. So, but I don't know.
I don't know either. For me, it was such a rough landing after this healing thing, and then coming into this battlefield kind of situation. I was okay, why? And I thought a lot about how we what was the tonality that we used, because my colleague used a more harsher tonality in the beginning. I was no, we needed to make invites and just lay out a nice program, and then make it juicy, nice, attractive, and then people come, and then the other way around. So we looked into all those bits and pieces where could be a thing, where did we do wrong, or but then in the end I realized, when I look into the whole scene, and it's everywhere, right? So, and I read up on this, and people say forget the invitations, it's too systemic. It's too big to think we have control over a situation, just how we introduce, and because it's the same thing with, let's say, rape, right? So it's not about if I wear a dress or not, and it's a bit of the same thing. People just push no matter what. We could have been, also like my nice things, rituals and blah, blah. Also, people found something. If they want to find something, then they find something.
Yes, yeah.
And that is the problem, how to tackle this one, how to create maybe a core group or community, and then go out, because we were actually way too little people. We needed much more help, support, but
from within the community to have to build some alliances before you started.
Yes,
to unfold this.
Yeah, I mean that was definitely a thing, and we've talked about it. Hey, is it not too early to do this? Don't we need to build more alliances that actually want to be in the museum and that really want to take over? Because also we heard Museum, we're not interested. We had that conversation in the 80s or 90s. So, but sometimes it's just time, you just have to go for it, because maybe we wouldn't have been reelected again, or things, I don't
Yeah,
know.
sometimes you just, as you said, you grab an opportunity that is not there, but is there, sort of.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah. And
starting to be there, so then you have to take it.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, the only thing is, well, the learnings. You ask about learnings, right? Like the good intentions are always great and cool, but like we need to install structures and fighting for positions and fighting for that diversity of people at the table before we even start our artistic work. And maybe that's the institution, the meta institution that you were talking about, that gives support, and it's just the support structure for the things, and just tells us this can come up, this can come up, you can protect yourself like this, and all these things that individuals are going through every time on their own without, oh, I didn't know that, oh, I didn't know that. But then other people say like, it's a bit silly that you didn't know it. You know, it really depends. And that's what I said with the learnings. Like for some people, it's just like no biggie. Like, yes, that's how it is when you enter such a space. And then other people are just so shocked. Sometimes when I tell some details from the year, people look at me like, oh, whoa. So yeah, I mean, we really need to challenge the structures or build new ones before we do that. And like boycott every time. Like we need also like need to be more brave to boycott when there's a person really struggling or a situation really going off. I don't know, like to do something, engage, or also people in the front lines or in the first row, like help them, just ask them, write them a nice email, make them food, offer your skill if you have a skill, like, hey, I know about how it is when you are in such a, just go there and offer your help. And this is what people are a bit arrogant about, like, I know it, like, I know it, let them fail. And then they will see, and that's
no,
you
you don't have to learn everything the hard way.
No,
it's already complicated and difficult.
No, like yeah, and then I don't know, yeah.
And because you're saying about the museum that it was already a structure in place, a sort of vision for what this museum, more like a gay museum in the beginning for like 30 years, and then making this shift towards a queer museum. And being in the structure for some years in the board, and you see how things are moving. What do you think about the pace of change? Of course, it's unique. This is something that it comes in every institutional context in a different way. But in a place like Schules Museum, were they ready for your year or not ready at all?
Yeah, I mean, of course.
Are they thankful now, in retrospect?
Are they what? Are they
thankful?
Thankful. Okay, yeah, I can answer that. But always when I think about this pace, and because I am a bit fast in things, and I know that, and I can work on that a little bit. But also, I always remember this quote from James Baldwin, who says it's like, it took my father's time, it took my mother's time, it took my uncle's and my nephew's time, and how much time do you want for your progress? Like how long should we wait? How long? Should we like wait outside the doors? And it's, as I said, like no matter how, with what structure and strategy you come, be it hard, soft, slow, people will either want to learn or not. I say, like, people want to have their claims or not. People want to, like, are open or not. And yes, sometimes it takes time a bit, but some people also went with it, but so, okay, I also, after the year, I spent some time on the board until the end of 2020. So I've been there for 4 years now. So I stopped being there, then COVID and I didn't go there. Then I went in August this year to go for like a summer fest, like summer occasion. And then I saw, before it was like gay old white men mainly, and one table with all the others. And this time I went and there was one table with gay white old men, and the rest was all the others, like
Mhm.
BIPOC, queer, like
Mhm.
left radical lesbians, and so on. And it was really nice to see. I mean, sure, like not also it was COVID, like not all of the older people felt safe to come. So it's not that they totally like
Mhm.
went away, but also, you know, but then I talked to some of them, and one said who works in the office, like, yeah, finally now I can understand you, because I had some time now, I needed to be like at the desk, and now I know how shitty some gay men can be. Like I, even as a younger gay man, got so much shit from them. And so like people start to, finally, you know, but
Mhm.
also like the structures changed, and it's a very different museum from before. If that's good or not, I don't know. I mean, sure, there's some
From what
progress.
you say, just having more people being feeling included and welcome there, it's already a great shift.
Yes, and there's like new positions opening up, and it's actually the team in the office is like a lot of like women, non-binary people, trans women,
Mhm.
women and trans women, you know, like however they want to identify. So yes, it has changed big time, and it was a generational shift. Let's see how.
Yeah, how it stays in time and how it develops. Vera, I wanted to ask you because one of the ways you are, let's say, presenting yourself, it's you use this term critical friend, which I think is really brilliant of definition of the definition of criticality with care. And I wanted to know how you came about this, let's say, term for your practice and how it comes to your practice. Maybe more and more since you've been closer, you reflect more about institutions. You had this experience inside institution and now outside. And how do you act as a critical friend? And to whom are you the friend, the critical friend?
Yeah, I mean, I have been critiqued for my criticality all my life. And only later, some of the people came and saw the value in that. That might be happening with the Schwules Museum as well. And feedback, it changed their life. It changed this and that and that and that. But at the time, they were like silencing me, sanctioning me, and banning me, and so on. And in school, university, blah blah, everywhere. And I was getting exhausted by that. So I wanted to find an empowering label again, self-labeling, right? For what I'm actually doing since childhood. So like, and what I'm doing is like mostly like I am present, I'm deeply engaged, and out of care I speak, because I wanted to have things better if I see this and this is not going. And it unfolds in every aspect, in friendships and work situations, and to have that as, yeah, coming with that label, like, hey, actually that's what I'm doing, and do you want it, you know, like a lot of times I didn't ask if people wanted, so but now I'm learning to ask for consent about it, and I'm also even starting to take money for it, actually. So in terms of like,
good.
hey,
People recognizing your skills about being critical, looking critically at things.
Yeah, I mean, like before, when you see things and nobody really enjoys it, but only can see it later, it's really shitty position to be in, and now to say like, hey, that's what I am, but also I don't need to spill over all the time. And if people want it, yeah, and it's really helpful. Like, hey, do you want my advice? Do you want my perspective on things? Oh yeah, and then like, okay, well, wow. Yeah, and that's like feminist thought, or even healing stuff, or intersectional, you know, anti-discriminatory work, or even like how structures are like from the economics background or business background. So there's a lot to see, and also like from a queer perspective, we look very different at things, and I think it's much more valued these days as it was a couple of decades ago.
For sure. Looks like.
Yeah.
I'm curious also about one thing that, it comes back in conversation also with Eric and Maria, my colleagues in Apparatus 22. We have we put ourselves in all sorts of weird, let's say, or not weird, we've been in trouble, in different projects. We put our soul and everything into them, and energy and emotions, and then you come out quite, drained or emotionally, let's say, exhausted or whatever. We learn our lesson, but then, we are again jumping into another, enthusiasm takes over and hope also takes over. And we jump, we almost forget also the lessons. Like we learn them, but then we sort of forget them too.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how do you balance between, all these things that you're learning and a sort of spring of hope, and never-ending spring of hope and enthusiasm for, being in art, being the critical friend, trying to help people, or trying to, to be there for change. How do you try to balance this? Because sometimes it can be, it might sound a bit like a loop. Of course, you move a bit more, you learn, but still you also forget very fast. Or you have this trust, you put again lots of trust into something that, maybe you should protect yourself a bit better in the future, but then enthusiasm comes, and then you put much more trust than maybe you should do it. So I'm curious if you have any tips for the people like us.
Not really.
Not really, no.
I mean, I also do take my lessons seriously. I look into the stuff. Next project, I won't do this again. And then I'm really trying, okay, how can I do this? Okay, I will not work, let's say, at the weekends anymore, or I will not work late at night, whatever, simple things, like, right? Or I need to have a care team, or I will not work for free, or this and that. But then it is impossible under these conditions, I think, because then if you want to collaborate and other people have other things or requirements, or are not there with you on the same page, it's not possible. So it's very difficult not to limit yourself too much when you really want to follow all the learnings. But I think they will come. They are there, and I think we learn more than we think we do, and we can just chill out of it, I think. But also, it would be. I mean, we also need to push it, because only when a field together pushes things, then things can work. Like back in the day when I talked about healing, everyone was like, "You're crazy."
Now look at how much. Now the
Yeah.
conversation is everywhere, or it's spreading, and it's very important conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. Or just leftist critique or intersectionality, all these things. We need to and really hold our boundaries, and just try bit by bit. And then, yeah, if someone tells me like, "Oh, I cannot work," it's like, "Oh, okay, cool. I have these things." And how can we just taking more time to have our expectations clear at the beginning of a new project. That already helps. Just sit down, have a coffee, make it nice, and say, okay, actually, I learned in my last project this and that. And then you come like, hey, I learned this. I really want to make this happen, or I don't want to do that again. Can you help me with not doing that? And of course, with the institutions, you just need to push it like all the time. Or to have your meta institution that you provided, like that you talked about in the beginning, that helps us with all these things.
With all these things, yeah.
Yeah, the big caregiver for the queer.
Yeah, or at least to have sort of maybe some guidelines, some things that maybe could be disseminated within other institutions, and then it's like this ramification that could maybe make some things better for us all. Because you talk a lot about.
Of course, there's this. Sorry, but yeah, of course, there's this accessibility sheets, for example, for people with other requirements that we have, right? And they send their thing, or some like BIPOC people send their thing, like, hey, I'm a trans person. I am in danger when I go out of the street, out into the streets. I need a taxi after I and these things are like, and some people do that, and I saw that, and it's really nice, and that's what I see. Like maybe we can sit down and just negotiate that and have a thing and if you want, like put it down
Mhm.
and make agreements between all the people involved, like what would feel good. I think we need more to like, how would this project feel good? And we cannot burn out at the end. So yeah, go for it. Like make the thing, put them online, share them, spread them.
There are quite a few, not quite a few, but some institutions that we read about, or we met some people like Norway now, in some other places that they try to look much more in depth and at at many details about many different communities and their needs. And I think maybe these institutions should share from their experience and from these tools and procedures to other institutions too that maybe don't have the time, or maybe they don't understand yet the necessity for this. And if someone already is doing the work, just to share the information, and then they see how they can implement in their own context. It's a very good idea indeed. I'll think about.
I think there's this platform, Pirate Care or something. Pirate Care.
I
don't know. I think it's Pirate Care or something. Or there's some like commons projects that are gathering stuff. But sure, we need to be much more connected.
I wanted to, because of course you talk a lot about community and you work in this idea of building communities. I'm curious more about some more recent work, like very recent work that you're doing or trying to do to imagine sort of new models of coexistence and sharing related with commoning. And maybe you can tell us something about some of your ideas or work, if it's something that you can share now. In a way, is it artistic work? Is it a reflection more about how you want to be in society? Or is it both? It's everything.
Well, it's kind of like, sure, I'm trying to figure out what's the next also place for me to, what makes sense after all of these strong experiences also. So I found the term commoning and the commons, and I found people who are working on that one. So we have been trying, I mean, in COVID times, it's very difficult. It has been very difficult to work just seeing each other on Zoom and so on. But we were trying to make a school or learning platform. So I looked into like other learning platforms for commoning and commons. How can we learn what is that, and what can we do? Like, what does it entail? And looking into best practices from agriculture to housing to digital commons. Like, what are the cool projects where people organize differently, where they finance each other differently, where they coexist differently? How can resources shared in another way? This might not go through, but anyway, it's a learning curve. The other project I'm doing, I'm looking into like the arts, and so we're writing an article that's gonna be, I don't know, spread in 2-3 months maybe, about what are the practices already in the art fields, like caring for the commons, doing arts more in the commons, commoning way. What does it mean? Like, what does it mean for an exhibition? What does it mean for art production? Art, like financing ourselves in the arts, and not to be dependent so much on the market, and also not on the state and the institutions, and how to institute differently. Then I have other groups where I look into like resource transformation, so like people with a lot of money redistributing, like how can they really redistribute their resources, their money into the communities on eye level. And not like charity, not giving, but like how can the people who want to like use that money, like how can they access also those, also like how to bridge that gap between like the super rich people that really want to do good but don't know really, and then the other ones who really need it, but how do they how do they go together in communities, because there's a lot of like secrecy about people with money and inheritance. It's like it's coming up as it's a huge topic in Germany, people with inherited wealth. So like all these things, it's a beginning of new things, but I'm really tired of being used up in all these usual institutions, and it's not fun anymore. But also like going totally off grid is also not solution, and just making my stuff on my own, you know. And community can also be hard. It can be fun, but it can also be hard. And what can be the tools, as I said, like looking into trauma care and nervous system stuff. I'm still looking into like healing and how to communicate in non-violent ways a bit better. But for now, it's like definitely the arts unionizing or commodifying in the art world. And I'm like, if anybody sees that and has like ideas, please get back to me. And yes, so I will look.
Yes, we're also, you know, always how do you say, looking for such ideas or initiatives to, you know, to put to you know, to push and help and support, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them out there. Like a lot, I think. Yeah, a lot of people all over the world doing amazing work that we don't know about, and like I think it's all out there. Just need to find it and sensitively adapt, or finding the core strategies and.
Where do you get your inspiration for talking about this? You know, talking about practices that are around us, you know, far or close. Where do you get your inspiration for you know, for your reflection about commoning? Is it mainly first-hand experience, or you really delve into the past, into the utopian projects of the past, or the theory, or from economics, or from?
I think it's a mix of everything. Like a cook, putting everything in and then stirring. And no, I mean, it's like, for example, commoning. I saw like there's this institute, the Casco Institute.
Casco in Netherlands.
So when I was in the Netherlands, of course, I heard about it. I was like, oh, what is that? Slowly. And then there's like the Commons Institute in Berlin, in Germany, in Bonn. So it's here and there. I read a lot. Theory, I can still like, I start only now looking more and more into like queer theory, Black radical tradition, the undercommons. It's also like finding communities, I don't know, like having open ears and eyes, and but yeah, I'm also much more of a, like, I'm not such a super good community person, actually. I mean, I like to be in company or to collaborate or stuff, but sometimes it's just, I get overwhelmed also by all the, like, I'm so sensitive towards everything. I sense everything all the time, and it's just like, oh my God, it's a bit exhausting. But if there's a cool one, I'm opening up, but sometimes they can be rough and harsh. And if the politics are not shared, it's very difficult. Even though I'm trying, because I mean, the commons should be like everyone is welcome. It's an open process. But I really like struggling with like open process, welcoming everyone, also be welcomed, and safe space. Like, because as a queer person, as a non-binary person that I am identifying like right now, it is difficult. It's just much more difficult. And if you have all this experience with sexism and so on, it's so difficult to be in a heterosexual environment and straight environment where there's not so much sensitivity around. It's so much work always. And so let's see. But yeah, there are beautiful communities out there. But when you talk about the two utopian projects, I think the ones that are right now that are contemporary, that's what I really enjoy, when I find some with really cool ideas. Because the old ones, as I say, like I look into them, they are sexist in a way then in the end, or racist, or you know, but like a lot of blank spots.
And shortcomings.
Yeah, and shortcomings, exactly. And of course, we all have them today. And I wonder what people will say in 30 years about our things that we did.
But still, it's so different. I don't know. We're just talking with some friends about, their practices and things that they did maybe 15 years ago, and now they wouldn't do the same because, of course, they're much more sensitive to many more aspects around them,
Yeah.
in the way they work about appropriation and about other culture or other people that they don't represent.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, I know what you say. It's
It's
just much
great.
more nuanced and much more
Yeah.
careful, caring, and much more sensitive.
Yeah.
Which is good.
And they are there because and then it leaves us much more like choice, because then people who don't want, I used to engage because there was no alternative, and now I can say ciao. I go to the other ones where there's at least a bit more sensitivity, and like start from a more common ground. Yeah, but in terms of commoning and taking everyone with us, I'm not sure.
It's a difficult thing to stay around the table, with people that are, let's say, exactly on the opposite side of what you believe in, or what you stand for. So it's important to be around this conversation, because otherwise the arguments that don't circulate, it's just two separate worlds. But then the process is painful for sure. I can attest, and you can attest. And yes, Vera, thank you so much for. I think we can maybe wrap it. And thank you so much for the time, for the energy, for the inspiration, for the generosity of sharing with us your practice, your experiences, the lessons you've been learning, I invite everybody to check your website, verahofmann.de, for more information about your practice. And, if they want to reach out for a critical friend.
Or be a critical friend to me, like.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, of course. So this critical friend thing goes both ways, which is perfect. Or in many ways, in many constellations. And also do mini promo. Thank you to Michelle and MATKA for inviting us to do this, to listen to, to follow you in the, to accompany you, let's say, in your talk. And everybody should check, what else is happening in this program that is called How Should We Talk About Queer Culture? And also to invite people to check also triumfamiria.ro, where they will find soon information about this upcoming exhibition, Sind Aluneci Kunst, You Feel, You Drift, and Sing, which is sort of, let's say, retrospective, or better said, a celebration of queer artistic practices from Romania in the last 20 years. So, you have, hopefully we give you some nice links to check, and then some good reasons to, to reach out to Vera, to reach out to Triumf Amiria. And yes, thank you again, Vera. It was a real pleasure to be with you, to spend this time and to listen to you. And looking forward to meeting real person, in person. Yeah.
Yes, that would be nice. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and yeah, I hope people got something out of it. Yeah, I'm always happy to collaborate. Even though I'm not a community person, I'm happy to collaborate with all that we have and grapple with the questions that I think are pretty much around everywhere. We all share a lot of the same questions.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think it was, as you said, I think you wished for your work at Sules. It was juicy, the conversation, and listening to you. There's a lot of wisdom and experience to take out, and for sure also to learn. So thank you again, and we see you soon. Lots of good vibes from Bucharest.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you very much. I'm